I suspect that dealing with a vulnerable or covert narcissist may actually be more damaging than dealing with a grandiose classic narcissist. The difference between the two is, roughly speaking, a grandiose classic narcissist thinks that they're amazing, and largely they can convince most of the world that they are. So most of the people, 80 to 90% of the people, they can convince that they are exceptionally good looking, exceptionally talented, exceptionally wealthy, exceptionally successful, intelligent, academically, achieved, and so on and so forth. The vulnerable, fragile, sometimes called covert narcissist, has exactly the same delusions of grandiosity and of superiority, and is just as entitled, but largely speaking, they can't convince the world of that. So the fragile narcissist is dealing with much more negative feedback, and we can presuppose, I think, that the fragile narcissist therefore experiences more narcissistic injury, because they're getting more negative feedback from the environment, than the classic or grandiose narcissist. Because they're experiencing more narcissistic injury, they're experiencing more narcissistic rage. So the classic grandiose narcissist is probably, relative to the fragile, more emotionally regulated. So on any one day, the emotional dysregulation of the classic or grandiose narcissist, who's getting fairly good amount of narcissistic supply, a fairly decent amount of adulation and worship from the environment, they're still going to have their narcissistic injury. They're still going to have their narcissistic rage attacks. They're still hypervigilant for insult or slight or threat, but not as much as the fragile narcissist. The fragile narcissist is going through way more peaks and troughs just because of all the narcissistic injury that they endure. When you, as the partner of somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, is spending time with them across time, it doesn't matter whether your partner has NPD or not, emotional dysregulation is a factor. So if you're with somebody and they're very, very emotionally dysregulated, we know this from the published literature, you start to become emotionally dysregulated with them, empathically. We know that if somebody has combat-related post-traumatic stress, when they come back home, the whole household gets this effect of tertiary trauma. So whatever happens inside of the house, whatever coping mechanisms are there inside of the house, across the entire household, this is studies that were done for combat post-traumatic stress specifically, there is more negative coping mechanisms that trickle down throughout the entire household. More alcohol, substance abuse, more tendency to use online gambling, more porn consumption, you name it, the household is feeling it. Why? Because if one person in the household is very emotionally dysregulated, at a non-conscious level, at a somatic, body-based, physiological level, we're all feeling that stress. And so if one member of the tribe or the pack, if you take it to the animal level, seems to be responding as though there is a lot of threat there, it would be a very poor adaptive response if we just ignored it, wouldn't it? So if we're mammals and we live in a pack of 12, like wolves, and one of the wolves is going, oh my God, there's threat, and we feel their anxiety and they're expressing a physiology that is showing anxiety or rage, it would be a very poor evolutionary response for us to go, so what? Don't care. In fact, you would get bred out of the pool. You'd be bred out of the gene pool, because if there really is a threat there and you're under responding to threat, you're going to die first. You're going to get eaten first. So it's adaptive in an evolutionary sense to respond to the emotional states of the other members of your pack, to the other members of your tribe. All this to say that if you're living with somebody and they have MPD or they have BPD, or even if they're addicted to alcohol or drugs and they're becoming or they have an anxiety disorder and they're becoming very, very anxious very, very regularly, you go with them as well. Bringing it back to covert or fragile narcissism, one of the major impacts of being with somebody who has fragile narcissism versus grandiose narcissism is you will become more emotionally dysregulated. And you might think, well, so what? So what if my emotions are dysregulated? Across time, that equals stress. That's stress on the system. Across time, your capacity to think clearly is damaged. Nobody's thinking clearly when their emotions are peaking and troughing regularly. It warps perception. Your whole body is saying something is wrong here. And so cognitively, that will hit the brain, that hits the mind, and you start going, I know that something is wrong because my body is telling me something is wrong. I now need to find something that's wrong, or I'll make it. It will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'll create catastrophe so oh, thank God, I can do something about this. All this anxiety is now pointed at a real world catastrophe, a real world problem. That's one reason why it's worse, I think, and more damaging to be with a fragile or covert narcissist. Another one that we know from the published literature is the covert or fragile narcissist is more violent than the grandiose or classic narcissist. Classic grandiose narcissism is not really highly associated with real physical violence unless they are comorbid with psychopathy and or alcoholism and drug use, which narcissism is highly comorbid with these issues. But let's think clearly and precisely. If somebody just has NPD, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be violent. If the NPD is associated with substance abuse, anxiety disorders, psychopathy, alcoholism, then yes, there will be more violence. There's more violence, according to the published literature, physical violence associated with fragile narcissism, particularly violence that is directed at, this was in one of the papers that I read, at animals and children. So where there is fragile narcissism, be it in a male or a female, and they feel like they're not being given the respect and the adulation that they deserve, they're running a story inside of their head that, like, nobody appreciates how brilliant I am. Nobody can see the genius and the wonder and the beauty that is me. Across time, that perpetual state of humiliation and frustration with somebody who has very weak ego boundaries, very poor impulse control, you can see how this, through this exhausting pattern of emotional dysregulation, could lead to outbursts of rage, narcissistic rage from all the narcissistic injury that builds up. But as we've already established, they don't have the external world status and the external world power to actually attack somebody who's on the same level as them. So what are they reduced to? They're either reduced to attacking entities that can't report them, animals, or attacking a small human who they can probably threaten and cajole and manipulate into not reporting their crimes. Dark stuff. I think probably the real threat in the world, just to change focus slightly for a second from the micro to the macro, is the fragile narcissist. I don't think, you see a narcissist that you can see, a narcissist that's just out there, and you'll be like, this guy, this effing woman just loves herself. Ugh, this guy is so full of himself. Ugh, and you can see it. They're preening. They're clearly exploitative. They're clearly bullying. They clearly feel that they only deserve to be in the presence of people who are the same status of them. They're one of the diagnostic criteria. It's one of the diagnostic criteria that irritates me, but there it is. It's there in the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Is a haughty demeanor. This demeanor of superiority, of condescension, of patronizing people. But you can see that, and you can see it coming. They're very vain, they're very self-involved, they're very thin-skinned, They lie a lot. They're constantly announcing to everybody, I'm so wonderful, I'm the best, I have the biggest brain, the hugest brain, or whatever it is. I don't think that person's a problem, really. They're a problem, but they're not the biggest problem. A woman like that, a man like that, they can largely get the world to agree that they're amazing, is less threatening than the person who really believes that. There's nothing in the literature, by the way, that says that people with MPD who are fragile are thinking, it's not that they have introspection. It's not that, oh, the grandiose narcissist has no ability to introspect, but the fragile narcissist does. Nothing that indicates that. So it's me. I'm just as delusional as the woman over there and the guy over there who thinks they're amazing. I have the same grandiosity as them. I am amazing. But the world doesn't agree with me. I'm not more introspective and more humble now and like, well, you know, I have these fantasies, but they're not real. I just need to grow up. No, there's none of that happening. I'm exactly like them. I'm just effing furious that no one in the world can see. I'm going to take revenge. I'm going to be vengeful. I was asked recently by somebody who works with an organization that's at the highest level that you can think of for shaping the world, let's say, or they believe they are at a global level. And this guy from this organization said to me, you know, I want you to talk to me about what we can do about narcissism in global leadership and psychopathy in global leadership. And we had this back and forth. And through the back and forth, I said to him, you know what? I don't even think it's grandiose narcissistic psychopaths that's the problem. If you look systemically, if you look in terms of the infrastructure, it wouldn't be the big obvious person. It'll be the 200 to 300 people who've infected the infrastructure that support them, that are vicariously taking narcissistic supply from them. The fragile, vulnerable, covert narcissists who can't convince the world that they're amazing because they want to be on stage. They want to be number one, but they can't get there. So what do? They ride the coattails of other people. They sneak their way in. They smile at your face and stab you in the back. They establish themselves in the power structures around the world, in politics, in banking, in finance, whatever it is. They are attracted to power. They want power positions. And then what they do is they quietly and subtly sink their teeth in and they sink their tentacles into that power structure. They get a little bit of dirt over there. And they're surrounded by people just like them. At that altitude, at that level in the power structure, you've got people and they're seeing each other. They're showing one face over here, but they're doing, their words are here, the rhetoric is here, but the actions are over here and they see each other. And these are nasty people. These are the nasty people that keep the really nasty people in power. But these big ones, they come and go. Who cares? She got assassinated. He got assassinated. So we have loads more we just put in place. It's me and you, the 200, 300 people at that level of power. We're the ones who are really, we've been here for 30 years. You think somebody who comes in for 2 or 4 years is going to make a difference? No, it's us. That's the problem. It's pro-social. It's that's a type of narcissism. So they're seemingly pro-social. These will be pillars of their community. They're working in charity. They're giving to charities. They're doing things for their community to maintain that position of power because they have to outsource narcissistic supply because they can't draw it. They don't have the capacity and the potency to draw it just to themselves. Because, I don't know, like, try and think of it in a dumb way. A guy thinks he's really, really hot, but he's not. Like, the genetics, the god of genetics just didn't bless him, but he has that delusion. He thinks he's really successful, but he's really not. He thinks he's super high IQ. And you're like, dude, you're kind of smart, but you're not. That you're not like a professor of astrophysics over here. Settle down. There's just a disparity. I think I'm here, but I'm really here. What do I do about that? I become pro-social. I draw people to me. I sink my tendrils into a lot of people, and I outsource the narcissistic supply. I'm now drawing from other places. So pro-social, that's a form of narcissism. I wouldn't say that's a narcissistic type. I describe that as a narcissistic strategy. So somebody would say, oh, this narcissist is a pro-social narcissist. I wouldn't confuse category with strategy. Be careful. I'd say that's a strategy. There's also a type of narcissist called the communal narcissist, and that's exactly what I'm talking about here. They need a community because they can't do it themselves. But it's not a category, it's a strategy. So there's communal, pro-social, vulnerable, covert narcissists. That is the major weight of narcissism that is weighing down on the structures of power that we have globally. I mean, and the world with technology is only becoming more global. You can't be like, oh, they have that problem in China. Don't worry about that. You're receiving communications and messages from China, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, to Zimbabwe, to Carolina in America, to North Carolina in America at the speed of electricity. It's all interrelated now. And as we move forward, it's becoming more and more interrelated. So if you think about, again, we're back into sci-fi and horror, my favorite genre, sci-fi horror. If you imagine networks that are weighed down by an infection, that are weighed down by a virus that's cancerous, that's spreading, that's what you have. But it's not the big tumors you should be worried about. It's when it metastasizes and spreads into the system and weighs it. That's when people, tragically, that's when people are very sick. When we see there's a tumor, we go, that's terrible. It's a big tumor. That is awful. But there's potential methods of attack there. Once you hear the words, it's spread. And people in the room, they go cold. You know, you see the faces become very, very, it's spread. Oh, okay. If it's localized, we got a chance. It spreads, it's a problem. It's spread. It's weighing the structures of power down. And the guy that I spoke to from this organization that tries to shape the globe off into the future, I was like, he said, well, what can we do about that? I said, it's too late. It's too late. It's too late. Because you can't, if you show up and you go, right, boys and girls, we're all going to do a test now. And if you fail that test, you're out. And we're going to put a good person in. We're going to put a good human being in your place. Who's applying the test? Who's going to sign off and say, yeah, apply this test with this consequence? That it's not the big tumor, it's the 200 to 300 pro-social, communal, two-faced, their words go one way, the actions go other way, communal, pro-social, fragile narcissist. They're the ones with the real power that's got this network effect. Don't worry about individuals. You want to worry about the network. The network is blind. Network, like anything that's become a network, anything that's been organized into a huge system is blind. You can't reason with it. It functions as a kind of primitive AI. The game was set up that way. So you set, like a simple example, you set up a corporation. Well, what's the point? What's the name of the game for winning points in a corporation? Maximize profits. Yeah, okay, that sounds cool. It sounds cool. And then you run it for a decade, and then you run it for another decade, and you're like, oh dear me, this is actually becoming a bit of a problem. How do we stop it? It's a monolith. It's a gargantuan. It's leviathanic. You can't stop it. Look, like you're going to get a team of 20 people in to come and change that? No, you can destroy it, you can eradicate it, but you can't change its direction once it's got to that point. This is not an optimistic video, but you know what? Who needs this cheap optimism? Sometimes you need to just look at things in the face and go, this is what it is, and this is why it's so hard. The people who are in power would never let anybody come in and change that, because that would be death to them. It would be like saying to the tumor, hey tumor, do you want to operate in such a way that means that you're going to die? The tumor's going to be like, yeah, sure, we're not fucking doing that. Just throw that strategy in the bin straight away. If you're interested in recovering from narcissistic abuse, if you're interested in getting over these superego injunctions and the narcissistic shared fantasy space once and for all, we have a package for you. It's the Fast Track Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, where I give you everything that I know that is the most up-to-date information that I have. It's across 4 videos. There's not much theory. It's directive advice as to this is what you need to do now if you want to overcome a narcissistically abusive relationship and never get into another one in the future. I highly recommend that you do that in conjunction with the 30-day protocol that we have. This eradicates the shared fantasy space and it gives you the tools you need to recognize the narcissistic voice inside your head, those narcissistic superego injunctions, to identify them, to resist them, and to change them to give you an intention and an outcome that you want. If you want to get a hold of that course, you can click the link here and it's available to start now. You own it for life. If you want to do it in a community and follow it day by day, we begin at the 1st of next month. If you want to do it in your own time, you're welcome to do that too. Ladies and gents, thank you for your time and for your attention. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.